The first ship vanished without sending a distress signal. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply gone. One moment, the Coalition scout vessel Whisper Dawn was drifting at the edge of the Perseus expanse, feeding routine telemetry back to Central Command. The next, every system aboard the ship froze mid-transmission. Audio dissolved into static. Visual feeds collapsed into black distortion. Then the vessel disappeared from every sensor array in known space, as if reality itself had swallowed it whole. 7 minutes later, it came back. The ship reappeared exactly where it had vanished, engines cold and lights flickering weakly against the void. No weapons fire, no debris field, no sign of battle. At first, Commander celebrated, believing the crew had survived some kind of navigational anomaly. Then the rescue teams boarded the vessel. Every crew member was still strapped into their stations. Every one of them was alive, and every single one of them had clawed their own eyes out. The emergency recording spread through military networks faster than containment teams could suppress them. Hardened officers who had survived border wars turned pale listening to the final cockpit logs. Pilots screamed about shadows moving between stars. Sensor operators begged unseen things not to open the doors. One officer repeated the same sentence over and over until his vocal cords ruptured. It saw us. No one knew what it was. That uncertainty terrified the galaxy more than war ever had. Within 48 hours, traffic through the Perseus expanse ceased completely. Merchant lanes shut down. Colonies near the outer sectors initiated planetary lockdowns. Religious cults declared the event a sign of cosmic judgment. Across thousands of worlds, billions stared into their night skies, wondering whether something ancient had finally looked back. Then the long-range observatories detected movement. At first, the object resembled a sensor error. The readings were impossible, fluctuating between mass signatures so enormous that technicians assumed their instruments were malfunctioning. Some scans suggested an asteroid cluster. Others indicated artificial construction, larger than orbital cities. One panicked analyst compared the dimensions to a small moon before being escorted out for psychological evaluation. But the numbers kept repeating. The object was real, and it was moving toward inhabited space. Supreme Coordinator Thale stood inside the Coalition's deep watch chamber 3 days later, surrounded by projections large enough to dwarf battleships. Thousands of military minds filled the observation decks in total silence as the newest scans materialized above them. Nobody spoke. The thing drifting through the void did not resemble a vessel built by any known civilization. It had no elegant symmetry, no visible insignias, no recognizable engine trails. Entire sections looked shattered or unfinished, as though colossal pieces had been welded together over centuries by desperate hands. Dark metallic scars stretched across its surface like the wounds of a dying god. Then the scale markers finished calibrating. Several officers physically staggered backward. The object was nearly 80 kilometers long. A junior commander whispered the question everyone else was too afraid to say aloud. How does something that size even exist? No one answered him because another transmission suddenly arrived from the outer listening posts. The object had changed course. Not randomly, intentionally. It was heading directly toward the Coalition core systems. Across the chamber, alarms erupted as hidden energy signatures began appearing beneath the structure's surface. Entire continents of dormant machinery awakened simultaneously. Massive heat blooms spread to the object like blood rushing through veins after centuries of stillness. And then, for the first time since it had been detected, the dead thing lit up. Billions of lights ignited across its surface all at once. Cities, not weapons, not reactors. Cities. The impossible structure drifting through interstellar darkness was not carrying an army. It was carrying a civilization. And somewhere deep inside that artificial world, something had already noticed the Coalition watching it. By the 6th day, panic had become organized. The Coalition Senate publicly denied that fear was spreading, but entire trade routes were collapsing under civilian evacuations. Insurance guilds suspended interstellar shipping. Frontier colonies overloaded transit gates trying to move populations inward toward the protected core systems. Every hour brought new conspiracy theories, each worse than the last. Some claimed the drifting megastructure was an automated tomb carrying the remains of an extinct species. Others believed it was a prison transporting something too dangerous to destroy. The oldest races whispered a different possibility. A hunter, Supreme Coordinator Thale, ignored the rumors as long as he could. He had spent most of his career preventing wars between civilizations powerful enough to crack planets apart, and he recognized mass hysteria when he saw it. Fear spread faster than logic. Fear transformed shadows into monsters. But even he struggled to remain calm while standing inside the Deep Watch chamber, watching the newest scans unfold across the tactical displays. The structure was slowing down, not through deceleration burns or gravitational braking. The thing simply slowed, violating several known principles of propulsion physics. One moment it moved with enough momentum to shatter moons if it collided with anything in its path. The next, its velocity dropped smoothly and silently as though inertia itself obeyed different laws inside that colossal machine. The Coalition's greatest physicists could not explain it. That frightened Thale more than the ship itself. "Any communication attempts?" he asked. A nervous technician lowered his gaze. "None acknowledged, Coordinator. We've transmitted 72 mathematical languages, historical archives, diplomatic greetings, military warnings, and emergency caution beacons. No response. Are they ignoring us? We don't know if they even recognize us as intelligent life." The answer lingered in the chamber like poison. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations were beginning to understand the same horrifying truth. Whatever lived inside that moving world operated on a scale so vast that smaller species might appear insignificant to them. An insect did not negotiate with a storm crushing its nest. Then another report arrived. A deep-range reconnaissance fleet had finally managed to penetrate close enough for internal scans. The images silenced the chamber instantly. The structure's outer shell concealed impossible environments beneath layers of armored plating kilometers thick. Vast atmospheric chambers stretched through the interior like hollowed continents. Artificial oceans reflected simulated sunlight. Entire mountain ranges existed inside rotating habitation cylinders larger than cities. Weather systems formed naturally within contained ecosystems. Rivers moved beneath artificial skies. Someone had built worlds inside a ship, not habitats. Worlds. A senior admiral stared at the projections with visible disbelief. That population density. The calculations updated. Estimated inhabitants. Unknown. Projected sustainable capacity. Several billion. A low murmur spread across the command decks. For the first time since detection, the fear changed shape. Not because the structure appeared less dangerous. Because it suddenly felt tragically human. Thale noticed it immediately in the reactions around him. Military officers who had demanded preemptive strikes days earlier now hesitated. Scientists leaned closer to projections with fascination instead of terror. The structure no longer resembled an invasion fleet waiting to attack. It looked like something built to survive the impossible. But survival from what? That question grew darker when the first intercepted transmissions were decoded. The signals did not come from leadership channels or military systems. They leaked accidentally from civilian networks buried deep within the structure. Fragmented audio, distorted visuals, broken translations, children laughing beneath artificial rain, teachers instructing students on emergency atmospheric breach procedures, crowded food distribution centers operating with military precision, entire districts conducting evacuation drills every few hours as though catastrophe could strike without warning. One recording disturbed the analysts more than any other. A child no older than 7 stood beside a viewport staring into deep space while asking a question in an unknown language. Coalition linguists spent hours building contextual translations before finally reconstructing the meaning. Do you think they found us again? Again. The word detonated through intelligence circles like an explosive. Suddenly, the megastructure no longer appeared to be merely traveling. It was running. Thale ordered the information suppressed immediately, but it was already too late. Rumors infected the Coalition faster than viruses. Entire media networks began speculating about whatever force could frighten a civilization capable of building artificial worlds. Fringe prophets declared the structure an omen of extinction. Markets crashed in several core systems. recruitment centers for planetary militias, saw a line stretching for kilometers, and still the giant vessel continued drifting closer, silent, watching. 3 days later, the Coalition finally received its first direct transmission, not from the structure itself, from one of their own reconnaissance teams. The scout frigate Meridian had approached within visual range before abruptly broadcasting a Priority 1 emergency signal. The transmission reached Coalition command in shattered fragments, distorted by interference powerful enough to melt sensor systems. At first, analysts believed the crew was under attack. Then they realized the voices were not screaming in fear. They were screaming in awe. The live feed showed the recon vessel floating beside one section of the megastructure's hull. Towering metallic walls stretched beyond visual range in both directions, covered in millions of illuminated windows glowing against the darkness like stars trapped beneath steel. But it was a movement inside those windows that froze the galaxy. People, not soldiers, not monsters, families, millions of them. The recon officer transmitting the footage sounded breathless, almost disoriented. "Coordinator, this isn't a warship." Behind him, the camera zoomed shakily toward a transparent section of the colossal hull. A massive interior chamber became visible beyond the glass. Forests stretched beneath artificial sunlight. Entire neighborhoods surrounded lakes and rivers. Children ran through fields while transport aircraft crossed overhead in organized traffic lanes. The recon officers swallowed hard. There are more civilians in this single district than on my homeworld. Then the transmission abruptly cut, not because of interference, because every screen in Coalition command suddenly went black simultaneously. For one long second, the galaxy disappeared into silence, and then a symbol appeared across every display in the chamber. Unknown language, unknown origin, but beneath it, translated perfectly into every Coalition dialect at once, came a single sentence. "We see you too." The message should not have been possible. That fact terrified the Coalition more than the words themselves. Every known translation system required years of cultural exposure to decode language patterns accurately. Even primitive civilizations needed months of diplomatic contact before meaningful communication became possible. Yet, whatever intelligence controlled the colossal drifting world had translated over 400 Coalition dialects instantly, flawlessly, and simultaneously. No algorithm in known space could do that, which meant one of two things. Either the strangers possessed computational technology centuries beyond the Coalition's understanding, or they had encountered civilizations like them before. Supreme Coordinator Thale replayed the transmission 14 times in private before ordering the chamber sealed. Outside, panic worsened by the hour. Several frontier governors openly demanded immediate military mobilization. Religious sects declared the message proof that ancient star judges had returned from dark space. Meanwhile, billions of ordinary citizens stared at news feeds showing the impossible vessel hanging silently near Coalition territory, like a waiting god. And still no one knew why it had come. The Coalition military wanted distance. The scientific councils wanted contact. The civilian worlds wanted answers before riots spread further. Caught between them all, Thale made the only decision left available. He authorized first contact, not through soldiers, through observers. The delegation assembled aboard the diplomatic carrier Horizon reached 2 days later. Linguists, engineers, psychologists, xenobiologists, and security personnel filled the vessel's briefing chambers while military escorts formed defensive formations around them. Every member of the mission understood the unspoken reality hanging over the operation. If the strangers chose violence, nothing in the Coalition arsenal could stop them. That understanding changed people. Commander Lyra Vey had noticed it immediately in her crew. Normally disciplined officers now checked weapon systems obsessively. Scientists whispered nervous theories in the corridors. Sleep deprivation spread throughout the ship as personnel watched leaked footage of the megastructure's interior over and over again, tried to understand what kind of civilization built forests inside armor hulls. Lyra understood their fear, but something else bothered her more. The strangers had opportunities to intimidate the Coalition. They had opportunities to display power, issue demands, threaten systems. Instead, they remained almost unervingly passive, silent, controlled. watching without advancing further inward. It did not feel like conquest. It felt like caution. That thought stayed with her as Horizon reached across the final distance toward the megastructure 3 days later. Nothing prepared the delegation for the reality of seeing it up close. The vessel eclipsed stars. Its outer hull stretched across the void like an artificial continent, scarred by damage so ancient and immense that entire mountain-sized plates had been welded over previous impacts. Massive defensive structures protruded from the surface at irregular angles, some large enough to swallow Coalition cruisers whole. But despite the overwhelming scale, signs of life covered every visible section. Lights, transit systems, moving aircraft, cities layered upon cities behind armored glass. The ship was alive, and somehow that made it more frightening. Receiving guidance signals, the communications officer reported quietly, "They're directing us." Lyra frowned. Toward what? The answer appeared moments later. A docking corridor opened directly into the megastructure's hull. The chamber beyond was so enormous Horizon Reach looked microscopic entering it. Entire support towers surrounded the incoming vessel, while atmospheric stabilizers generated artificial weather currents powerful enough to shake the carrier's frame. Thousands of smaller craft moved through organized flight lanes overhead with machine precision. Civilian traffic. Inside a drifting world. No one aboard the Coalition vessel spoke during docking procedures. They simply stared through the observation screens, trying to process the impossible scale surrounding them. Then the doors opened. The welcoming delegation waiting beyond the airlock looked ordinary. That unsettled Lyra more than anything else so far. The beings standing inside the docking chamber were clearly the architects of the megastructure. Bipedal, organic, physically smaller than several Coalition species. They wore dark uniforms marked with unfamiliar symbols and carried no visible weapons. But their eyes were wrong. Not biologically. Emotionally. Every single one of them looked exhausted. Not temporary fatigue. Not stress. Something deeper. The kind of weariness carried by people who had survived too much for too long. A woman stepped forward from the center of the group. Her hair carried strands of gray despite features that suggested middle age. Thin scars lined one side of her neck beneath the collar of her uniform, but it was her composure that captured the room instantly. Calm, controlled, heavy, like someone accustomed to standing inside disasters without breaking. "I am Marshal Adrian Vale," she said. The Coalition translators hesitated for only a fraction of a second before rendering the words perfectly. Lyra felt unease ripple through her crew again. The strangers were translating them in real time now. Impossible. Marshal Vale seemed to notice their discomfort immediately. "You are afraid," she said softly. "That is reasonable. Most species when they first see us." Several Coalition officers stiffened at the statement. "First?" One scientist asked before he could stop himself. For the first time, something shifted behind Vale's expression. Not anger, pain, but before she answered, alarm suddenly echoed through the docking chamber. Every human nearby reacted instantly, not chaotically, professionally. Massive armored barriers slammed down across nearby corridors, while civilians disappeared from the surrounding walkways with astonishing speed. Pilots abandoned maintenance operations and sprinted toward emergency stations. Security teams flooded into defensive positions so quickly it felt rehearsed beyond reason. Lyra's instincts screamed danger. "What's happening?" she demanded. Vale didn't answer immediately. She was staring upward toward something only humans seemed able to recognize. Then the Coalition delegation heard it too. A sound, low at first, distant, vibrating through the metal beneath their feet, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the megastructure. Warning sirens. Not external, internal. And suddenly, across every visible screen inside the docking bay, the same message flashed repeatedly in blood-red symbols translated into Coalition languages. Unidentified contact detected beyond the outer dark. Human personnel froze, not in confusion, in fear, real fear. One young officer near the docking corridor whispered something under his breath before he realized Coalition visitors were close enough to hear it. "Oh, God," he said quietly. "They found us again." The silence that followed felt heavier than gravity. Commander Lyra Vey watched the humans around her transform in seconds. The exhaustion she had noticed earlier vanished beneath something colder and far more dangerous. Civilians disappeared from public corridors with disciplined speed, while armored blast doors sealed entire sections of the docking bay. Overhead lighting shifted from soft white to crimson emergency illumination, washing the massive chamber in the color of fresh blood. No panic, no screaming, just preparation. That terrified her more than chaos would have. Marshal Adrian Vale turned sharply toward one of her officers. Confirm the contact. The young officer's hands trembled over a holographic console. Long-range signatures emerging from the outer drift zone. Movement pattern matches previous incursions. Previous incursions. The phrase struck Lyra like ice water. Before she could ask what it meant, another officer spoke from across the chamber. Estimated arrival to visual range 37 minutes. 37 minutes. Whatever the humans feared was close. Vale closed her eyes briefly, and for the first time since the delegation arrived, the mask of control slipped. Lyra caught a glimpse of something raw beneath it. Exhaustion, anger, resignation. Then it vanished. Evacuation Protocol 7. Vale ordered calmly. Wake the reserve tactical divisions. Move civilian sectors into shelter rotations immediately. The humans moved without hesitation. That bothered Lyra almost as much as the warning itself. These people had practiced this scenario countless times before. As Coalition personnel exchanged uneasy glances, Vale finally looked back toward the delegation. "You should return to your ship," she said quietly. Lyra stepped forward. "Not until you explain what's happening." Vale studied her for a long moment. Around them, the docking chamber thundered with organized movement. Massive armored vehicles rolled through transit corridors. Fighter craft launched upward into hidden launch tunnels. Somewhere deep inside the megastructure, warning sirens continued pulsing like a heartbeat of a wounded giant. Finally, Vale spoke. "The reason we left our home is here." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber lights flickered violently. A distorted transmission burst across every nearby display. Static swallowed most of the image, but fragments remained visible between waves of interference. Coalition analysts aboard Horizon Reach immediately began recording the feed. At first, Lyra thought she was looking at wreckage floating in deep space. Then the wreckage moved. The transmission showed a distant Coalition colony world, near the Perseus border, or what remained of it. Entire continents burned beneath blackened skies. Oceans boiled with unnatural storms. Great metallic structures stretched across the surface, like veins spreading through flesh. Thousands of civilian ships attempted to flee orbit, while something enormous drifted above the atmosphere. Not a ship, a creature. The thing resembled no known life form. Its body appeared biomechanical, layered with moving armor plates and glowing fractures pulsing with crimson light. Vast appendages unfolded slowly around a dying planet, while smaller entities swarmed beneath it like parasites feeding on a corpse. The feed ended abruptly as the colony vanished in white static. Every human in the docking chamber stopped moving. No one spoke. Lyra stared at the dead screens, struggling to process what she had seen. "What was that?" Marshal Vale answered without emotion. "The reason 87 human worlds no longer exist." The words hollowed the air from the room. A Coalition security officer barked an angry laugh. "That's impossible. Nothing destroys 87 worlds." Vale turned toward him slowly. "You're right," she said. "Not quickly." A chill crawled through Lyra's spine. Outside the docking bay, the entire megastructure vibrated as hidden engines deeper than mountains began awakening. Massive power signatures surged across Coalition sensors. The drifting world was preparing for war. And suddenly the Coalition delegation realized something horrifying. The humans had never considered themselves safe here. Not for a single moment. "Coordinator Thale must be informed immediately," Lyra said. "He already knows," Vale replied. As if summoned by the statement, another transmission burst across Coalition channels. Supreme Coordinator Thale appeared above the holographic displays aboard both vessels simultaneously. The exhaustion in his face mirrored Vale's almost perfectly. "Commander Vey," he said sharply, You are ordered to withdraw from the structure at once. Lyra frowned. Coordinator, that is not a request. Something behind him exploded in sparks. Coalition command chambers echoed with shouting voices and alarm sirens. The situation back home was deteriorating fast. Reports flooded in from across Coalition territory. Border sensors were failing. Outer colonies were going dark. Entire communication relays vanished without distress calls. And worst of all, the anti-human panic spreading through civilian systems had erupted into open violence. Coalition worlds blamed humanity already. Several planetary governments demanded the megastructure be destroyed before the unknown enemy reached core space. Protest fleets gathered near military stations. Some admirals openly threatened unauthorized strikes against the humans despite the impossible technological gap between them. Fear was fracturing the Coalition faster than any invasion could. Lyra looked toward Vale. If this thing is hunting you, why come here at all? For the first time, anger flashed across the human marshal's face. Because running only delays extinction, she said. Eventually it reaches every civilization, every species, every world. Her jaw tightened. We came because your coalition still has a chance. Another tremor shook the station, this one stronger. Far above the docking chamber, massive armored segments along the megastructure's outer shell began rotating open. Coalition scanners struggled to process what they were seeing. Entire sections of the artificial world unfolded outward, revealing hidden defensive systems buried beneath layers of cities and habitation sectors. Thousands of weapons emerged from concealment, not improvised offenses, fleet killers. The realization hit Lyra all at once. The humans had not built a world that could fight. They had built a civilization that survived only because it never stopped fighting. Then a final transmission arrived from the outer listening posts. Visual confirmation. The enemy had entered Coalition space. The image appeared across the docking bay screen seconds later. At first, Lyra thought she was staring into empty darkness. Then the darkness blinked. Something vast moved between the stars beyond the system's edge. So enormous Coalition sensors could not fully measure it. Smaller biomechanical entities drifted around the shape like scavengers orbiting a predator. The stars behind the formation dimmed unnaturally as if light itself bent away from it. One human technician nearby whispered through pale lips, 3 harvesters. Another answered in disbelief. No, he said quietly. 4. The room went completely silent. Marshal Vale stared at the incoming horrors for several seconds before speaking words that made every living being in the docking chamber suddenly understand how small they truly were. They followed us farther than ever before. The first Coalition fleet died in under 4 minutes. Not defeated. Erased. Commander Lyra Vale watched the battle unfold from the command deck of the human megastructure, while hundreds of tactical displays struggled to track events happening faster than Coalition systems could process. 300 Coalition warships surged toward the incoming biomechanical entities in perfect military formation, weapons charging bright against the darkness. It was the largest offensive mobilization in modern Coalition history, and it accomplished nothing. The enemy did not fire conventional weapons. No plasma, no missiles, no visible energy discharges. The harvesters simply moved. Space around the creature distorted violently as massive black fractures spread outward across the battlefield. Entire Coalition cruisers folded inward like crushed metal sculptures before vanishing into microscopic debris. Defensive shields collapsed instantly. Communications dissolved into static and screaming. One battleship survived long enough to broadcast a final visual feed. Its captain stood on a burning bridge staring out at something massive approaching through ruptured space. Behind him, officers shouted firing solutions while alarms screamed across the vessel. Then the captain stopped speaking mid-sentence. Every crew member on the bridge froze simultaneously. Not dead. Listening. Slowly. They all turned toward the same empty corner of the room, as though something invisible had entered the ship beside them. The transmission ended there. No explosion. No impact. Just silence. Lyra felt her blood run cold. Around her, human officers continued working with brutal efficiency despite the horror unfolding outside. Massive sections of the megastructure shifted position, while hidden defense arrays activated across the outer hull. Entire civilian districts disappeared beneath armored barriers thicker than warships. Yet no one aboard the human vessel appeared surprised, only tired. Marshal Adrian Vale stood near the central tactical display, watching the Coalition fleet collapse without visible emotion. "You knew this would happen," Lyra whispered. Vale didn't deny it. "Yes." "Then why let them engage?" The Marshal finally looked at her. "Because your people still believe conventional warfare mattered." Outside the tactical displays, another Coalition dreadnought vanished into gravitational distortion. 300 ships. Gone. The Harvester formation continued drifting inward almost lazily, surrounded by clouds of smaller biomechanical entities, feeding on debris fields left behind by the destroyed fleet. The creatures moved with horrifying coordination, not like machines obeying commands, but like parts of a single living organism. One mind, one hunger. Coalition command channels erupted into panic. Emergency evacuation orders spread across nearby systems, while civilian traffic overwhelmed transit gates. Entire planetary populations scrambled to flee inward toward the core worlds. But everyone knew the terrible truth already. Nothing could outrun the Harvesters forever. A Coalition admiral appeared across emergency communications, his face pale with barely controlled terror. "To all military forces," he said shakily, "fall back to secondary defensive positions immediately. Do not engage the enemy directly." The transmission cut as his flagship exploded behind him. Lyra turned toward Vale. "What are those things?" The answer came from another voice. An elderly human man stepped forward from the rear command stations, his movement slow, but steady despite the alarm surrounding them. His gray uniform carried no military insignia, yet every human officer nearby straightened subtly when he approached. "Predators," he said quietly. Marshal Vale nodded once. "Commander Lyra Vey, this is Dr. Elias Mercer, architect of the Exodus fleet." Lyra stared at him. "You built this place?" Mercer glanced upward toward the endless layers of civilization surrounding them. "Not alone. Millions did." His expression darkened. "Most of them are dead now." Another impact shook the command deck. This time it came from the humans. Far beyond the megastructure, hidden weapon systems ignited for the first time. Lyra expected explosions. Instead, she witnessed precision beyond comprehension. Thousands of narrow beams lanced silently through deep space, striking incoming biomechanical entities with surgical accuracy. Segments of the enemy's swarm disintegrated instantly, while others spun away crippled. Massive railgun batteries buried inside the megastructure's hull fired tungsten projectiles at relativistic velocity, punching clean through enemy formations with terrifying force. The human vessel attacked like a civilization that had spent generations learning exactly how to kill these things. And yet, the Harvesters kept coming. One of the smaller entities slammed into the outer defensive grid seconds later. Human point defense systems annihilated it instantly, but not before fragments struck the megastructure's hull hard enough to trigger seismic tremors through entire districts. Lyra looked around in disbelief. "Your weapons can hurt them." "Yes," Vale replied. "Then why keep running?" No one answered immediately. Dr. Mercer stepped closer to the tactical displays, his tired eyes reflecting the burning remains of the Coalition fleet. "Because every battle costs us world," he said softly. The room darkened as another set of hidden screens activated around them. Archive footage. Human worlds. At first Lyra thought she was seeing paradise. Oceans beneath blue skies. Vast cities stretching across green continents. Children running through sunlight. Ordinary lives unfolding across dozens of different planets. Then the footage changed. The Harvesters descending from dark space. Entire moons breaking apart. Atmospheres igniting. Civilizations collapsing into extinction, while human fleets fought desperate holding actions above burning worlds. Lyra watched in silence as system after system vanished from existence. 87 worlds. Gone. And suddenly she understood the true horror of a human megastructure. It was never meant to conquer galaxies. It was built to carry survivors after galaxies failed to save them. Dr. Mercer spoke, quietly while the footage continued playing. We tried fighting them directly once. We lost 30 billion people in 11 days. His voice remained calm, but something unbearable hid beneath it. After that, humanity changed. New images appeared across the screens. Human shipyards orbiting shattered planets. Children training beside soldiers. Entire populations constructing artificial worlds instead of cities. Weapons hidden inside hospitals. Defensive systems disguised as infrastructure. Human civilization had transformed itself into something terrifyingly practical, not because they desired war, because extinction gave them no alternative. Marshall Vale folded her arms behind her back. The Coalition believes we brought this enemy here. Her eyes hardened slightly. That's incorrect. Another tremor rippled through the vessel as distant weapons fire illuminated the darkness outside. They were already coming, she said. Suddenly alarms erupted across the command deck. A tactical officer turned sharply from his console. Marshall, harvester signatures bypassing outer engagement zones. How? The officer swallowed hard. They ignored our fleet positions entirely. Every display shifted simultaneously toward the Coalition core systems, toward the populated worlds, toward billions of civilians. Lyra stared in disbelief. They're not targeting your ship. Dr. Mercer looked suddenly ancient. No, he said quietly. They never were. The first core world went dark 17 minutes later. Not conquered, consumed. Coalition citizens across thousands of systems watched the live planetary feed vanish in real time. One moment, the world of Ethon Prime glowed proudly beneath its orbital defense network, home to nearly 9 billion civilians and one of the Coalition's oldest cultural centers. The next, every transmission from the planet cut simultaneously. Then the atmosphere itself began to scream. The sound tore across emergency channels as orbital satellites captured impossible distortions spreading through the sky. Vast fractures opened above the planet, like wounds in reality, black veins crawling across cloud layers, while cities below vanished beneath waves of unnatural darkness. No invasion fleets descended. No armies landed. The Harvester simply drifted overhead, and life beneath it started dying. Entire populations collapsed where they stood. Ships fell from orbit without power. Oceans convulsed violently against coastlines, while electrical storms swallowed continents. Coalition scientists desperately tried to explain the phenomenon until their own laboratories lost contact mid-transmission. Within 6 minutes, Ethon Prime was silent. No survivors. No debris. Just a dead world hanging beneath a blackened sky. Panic shattered the Coalition. Emergency broadcasts flooded every remaining system. Transit gates became war zones as billions fought desperately for escape routes deeper into protected sectors. Military command structures fractured under pressure, while planetary governors issued contradictory evacuation orders. Several frontier systems declared independence outright, believing the Coalition incapable of protecting them. And through all of it, one accusation spread faster than fear itself. Humanity brought this. Commander Lyra Vey felt the hatred growing even aboard the megastructure itself. Coalition refugees arriving through emergency corridors stared at human personnel with suspicion and fury. News networks replayed footage of the giant vessel's arrival beside images of dying worlds. Politicians demanded the humans leave Coalition territory immediately, convinced the Harvesters would follow them elsewhere. But the Harvesters weren't following anymore. They were hunting. Marshal Adrian Vale stood inside the central war chamber, watching tactical projections update every few seconds as additional systems disappear from Coalition maps. 3 more colonies lost. An officer reported quietly. No survivors detected. Another voice followed immediately. Civilian evacuation routes from the Harkin corridor have collapsed. Refugee fleets are trapped. Vale's jaw tightened. Deploy shield carriers. A younger officer hesitated. Marshal, those ships won't survive direct contact. I know. The officer swallowed and relayed the order anyway. Lyra watched the exchange in silence before finally speaking. You're sacrificing your own fleets. Vale turned toward her sharply. No, I'm buying civilians' time. Outside the megastructure, hundreds of human warships accelerated toward collapsing refugee corridors. They were smaller than Coalition dreadnoughts, leaner, heavily armored, built for endurance instead of dominance. Lyra realized something disturbing as she studied them. Every human vessel fought defensively, protective formations, shield overlap patterns, interception trajectories. Even after generations of extinction warfare, humanity still designed its military around preservation instead of conquest. That realization hit harder moments later, when the first refugee convoy reached the megastructure. Thousands of civilian ships flooded into docking sectors, carrying terrified coalition survivors. Injured families poured through emergency intake corridors, expecting imprisonment or rejection. Instead, they found human medics waiting beside food distribution centers already prepared for mass arrivals. The humans had planned for this, not just strategically, emotionally. One exhausted coalition mother collapsed to her knees, clutching two children, while expecting armed guards to separate them. Instead, a human medic wrapped thermal blankets around the children before quietly carrying their unconscious father toward emergency surgery. No speeches, no conditions, just help. Lyra noticed something else, too. The humans looked haunted every time new refugees arrived, as though each evacuation reminded them of something they had failed to save long ago. Then another crisis erupted. A coalition security team stormed the lower civilian sectors. 3 hours later, after rumors spread the human infiltrators were sabotaging escape routes. Fear had become paranoia now. Several armed officers nearly opened fire inside a refugee processing center before human security units intercepted them. For one terrible moment, Lyra thought violence would explode inside the megastructure itself. Instead, the humans stood their ground without raising weapons. Search every corridor if you must, one human officer said calmly, while frightened civilians are behind him. But point those rifles somewhere else. The coalition commander sneered. Your species brought extinction to our doorstep. The human officer's expression hardened slightly. No, he said quietly. Extinction was already walking toward you. We're just the first people who survived long enough to recognize it. Before tensions could escalate further, emergency alarms detonated across the megastructure. Not external, internal. Entire sections of the tactical network began collapsing simultaneously. Lights flickered. Defense systems shut down unexpectedly across multiple sectors. Engineers shouted over comm channels, while automated security barriers sealed entire corridors without authorization. Lyra's blood ran cold as reports flooded command stations. Life support failures, navigation corruption, power fluctuations spreading like infection. The harvesters were inside the systems. Not physically, digitally. Dr. Elias Mercer appeared moments later beside collapsing tactical displays, his face grim but unsurprised. They adapted faster this time, he muttered. Lyra stared at him. Adapted to what? Their favorite weapon, Mercer answered softly. Fear. Then the screens changed. Across every active monitor inside the war chamber, distorted images appeared simultaneously. Human worlds burning, coalition cities collapsing, refugee ships drifting lifeless through darkness. And beneath the images came voices, whispers, thousands of them layered together. Not language, thought. The sound crawled through Lyra's skull like cold fingers pressing against her mind. Officers nearby staggered visibly. One coalition technician began screaming uncontrollably before collapsing to the floor. Mercer immediately killed the audio channels. Too late. Several humans aboard the bridge stood perfectly still now, staring at nothing. One whispered quietly through trembling lips. It remembers Earth. Marshal Vale moved instantly. Sedate anyone exposed longer than 20 seconds. Isolate infected systems. Lyra grabbed Mercer's arm. What was that? The old scientist looked toward the tactical screens with visible hatred. The harvesters don't just destroy civilizations, he said. They learn them. The implications slammed into Lyra all at once. The dead worlds, the vanished populations, the impossible psychological warfare. These creatures weren't merely consuming life. They were absorbing it. Every species they exterminated became fuel for the next extinction. Suddenly another alert erupted across the command deck. One of the harvesters had changed trajectory, not toward military targets, toward the coalition capital itself. toward 80 billion civilians. Marshal Vale stared at the incoming projections for several silent seconds before giving the order that made every human officer nearby freeze. Begin construction of the Halo array. Even Lyra could feel the shift in the room. Fear. Real fear. A tactical officer spoke carefully. Marshal, if we activate the array inside populated space, I know the cost. The officer hesitated anyway. Entire sectors could become permanently uninhabitable. Vale's eyes never left the tactical display. If the harvesters reach the capital, she said quietly, there won't be any sectors left to save. The Coalition capital had never known darkness. For nearly 12,000 years, the world of Celestra burned at the center of civilized space like a beacon visible across entire sectors. Its orbital rings glittered with endless traffic. Artificial constellations surrounded the planet in perfect geometric formations. 80 billion beings called the system home, believing nothing in existence could ever truly threaten the heart of the Coalition. Now evacuation fires covered the night side of the planet. From orbit, Celestra looked wounded. Millions of civilian ships surged desperately away from the atmosphere in chaotic waves, while defense platforms formed shrinking protective lines around the system. Entire orbital districts had already lost power. Communications networks failed every few minutes under the strain of panic transmissions flooding across every available frequency. And beyond it all, drifting silently through the darkness, came the harvesters. Commander Lyra Vey stood beside Marshal Adrian Vale on the observation deck of the human megastructure, while the Halo array construction continued around them. Thousands of automated drones swarmed through open space, assembling colossal ring structures around the Coalition capital. Massive energy conduits stretched between orbiting platforms, while human warships positioned themselves in layered defensive formations. The array was enormous. Not a weapon, an execution. Lyra finally understood why the humans feared using it. The Halo array did not merely destroy targets. It collapsed localized space-time itself, erasing everything caught inside the containment radius. Ships, cities, atmospheres. Entire biospheres reduced to sterile cosmic ash. A final solution built by a species cornered too many times. You built this after Earth fell, Lyra said quietly. Vale nodded once. We built it after realizing conventional victory no longer existed. Below them, Celestra's evacuation traffic thickened into near gridlock. Refugee convoys collided trying to escape orbital lanes, while military escorts abandoned formation to rescue damaged civilian ships. The Coalition was unraveling faster than command structures could stabilize it, and still the humans stayed. That fact spread across civilian broadcasts now. Coalition citizens watched human fleets positioning themselves directly between the harvesters and evacuation corridors. They watched human shield carriers absorb devastating attacks, while continuing to protect refugee vessels. They watched human medical ships pulling wounded civilians from collapsing stations regardless of species or allegiance. For the first time since the crisis began, the anti-human hatred started breaking apart. Not completely, but enough. A Coalition news anchor broadcasting from a refugee transport said the words millions had begun thinking. They could leave, she whispered while human warships burned outside her viewport. If survival was all they cared about, they would have left already. Then the harvesters arrived. The first creature entered Celestra's outer defense perimeter without slowing. Coalition defense cannons unleashed concentrated fire powerful enough to vaporize fleets. The harvester ignored it completely. Massive black fractures spread outward through space as reality bent around the entity's approach. Entire orbital platforms folded inward and vanished before they could retreat. Human fleets engaged seconds later, and suddenly the darkness itself caught fire. Thousands of human weapons ignited across space simultaneously. Railgun rounds streaked through the void like artificial meteors, while defensive laser grids carved burning scars across the harvester's outer shell. Human warships moved with terrifying coordination, sacrificing positioning advantages repeatedly to shield evacuation convoys still escaping the planet below. Lyra watched one human destroyer deliberately intercept a gravitational rupture meant for civilian transports. The ship disintegrated instantly, but the transport survived. No hesitation, no retreat. The humans fought like extinction had already taught them exactly what mattered most. Inside the war chamber, emergency reports flooded tactical displays faster than officers could process them. Eastern orbital ring collapsing. Civilian casualties exceeding projections. Harvester entities breaching inner defensive sectors. Evacuation corridors 7 through 9 lost. Another impact shook the megastructure violently. One of the smaller biomechanical entities had slammed directly into the outer hull. Human point defense systems annihilated it immediately, but not before fragments tore through several habitat sectors. Emergency sirens echoed through civilian districts while rescue teams sprinted toward decompressed corridors. Still the humans continued fighting. Lyra turned toward Dr. Elias Mercer as he monitored the Halo Array's completion progress. How much longer? The old scientist looked exhausted beyond words. 23 minutes. We don't have 23 minutes. I know. Outside, another human fleet vanished beneath expanding gravitational fractures. But even as ships died, more moved forward to replace them. Humanity's defenses did not break. They eroded, slowly, deliberately, as though every commander already understood survival was impossible and fought anyway. Then the transmission arrived. It spread simultaneously across every military and civilian frequency in the system. Marshal Adrian Vale's voice, calm despite the apocalypse unfolding around her. To all Coalition worlds, she began quietly, humanity owes you the truth. Lyra looked toward Vale in surprise. What are you doing? Ending the lie. Across the system, billions listened while battle fire illuminated the darkness outside Celestra. We told you we came seeking refuge, Vale continued. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. Another harvester breached the outer defenses. Human fleets rammed it head-on. We also came because the harvesters follow concentrations of intelligent life. Every civilization they consume makes them stronger, larger, smarter. Her voice tightened slightly. For generations, humanity believed isolation could save us. We were wrong. The tactical screens exploded with casualty reports. Still she continued speaking. The only thing these creatures fear is resistance they cannot easily consume. Unity they cannot fracture. Species willing to protect each other instead of sacrificing one another. Lyra suddenly understood. The humans had not come to hide behind the Coalition. They came to make sure someone survived after them. Vale's voice softened. Earth died because humanity faced extinction alone. We will not let the galaxy repeat our mistake. A massive tremor ripped through the megastructure. The largest harvester had reached low orbit. Through the observation deck, Lyra saw it clearly for the first time. The thing dwarfed cities. Entire sections of its body pulsed with fragments of consumed civilizations fused grotesquely into its armor. Metallic structures resembling shattered architecture protruded from living flesh. Faces seemed trapped beneath translucent layers of black organic material, half visible for seconds before dissolving again. The creature carried extinction physically inside itself, and now it was descending toward Celestra. Panic erupted across Coalition channels. Remaining military formations collapsed under pressure, while evacuation traffic devolved into chaos. Entire districts of the planet below ignited beneath spreading atmospheric distortions. Dr. Mercer suddenly looked up from his console. The Halo Array is ready. Silence hit the war chamber. Every officer nearby understood what came next. Activate the array and sterilize half the system forever. Or hesitate and lose the galaxy. Marshal Vale stared at the tactical displays, showing billions still trapped on the planet below. For the first time since Lyra had met her, the human marshal looked uncertain. Then another transmission reached the command deck. Not military, civilian. A little girl from one of the refugee convoys appeared shakily across emergency channels, clutching a recording device while explosions thundered somewhere behind her. Her voice trembled. "Please," she whispered, "don't let it reach us." No one in the war chamber moved. Outside, the harvester breached the final orbital defense line, and deep beneath Celestra's atmosphere, something enormous began waking beneath the human megastructure itself. At first, no one understood what they were seeing. Deep beneath the human megastructure, hidden behind layers of artificial continents and armored city sectors. Ancient systems older than most surviving human colonies began activating one by one. Entire regions of the vessel lost power as energy redirected inward towards something buried at the structure's core. The megastructure trembled, not from enemy attacks, from awakening machinery large enough to move worlds. Commander Lyra Vey stared at the tactical displays as impossible readings flooded Coalition sensors. Gravitational spikes erupted beneath the vessel. Space around the structure bent visibly, stars warping into stretched lines across observation screens. Dr. Elias Mercer looked suddenly very old. "We swore never to use it again," he whispered. Marshal Adrian Vale stood motionless beside the command platform, while evacuation alerts screamed throughout the system. Outside, human fleets continued dying in layers around Celestra, sacrificing themselves minute by minute to hold the harvesters away from civilian escape corridors. But the line was collapsing. The largest harvester had already breached low orbit. Entire continents beneath it were disappearing into expanding fields of darkness. Coalition defenses no longer existed. Only scattered human formations remained, fighting impossible odds with the stubbornness of a species that had learned long ago how to stand in front of extinction. Lyra turned sharply toward Vale. "The Halo Array is operational. If we activate it now, we can still contain the system." Vale said nothing. Mercer answered instead. "She won't use it." Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "Billions will die." "Yes," Mercer replied quietly. "And trillions more later if we repeat the same mistake." Another violent tremor shook the megastructure. Across every tactical display, hidden sections of the vessel began unfolding outward. Entire mountain-sized plates separated from the hull, while colossal internal structures rotated into alignment beneath the artificial world. The Coalition had believed the vessel was an ark. Then they believed it was a fortress. Now Lyra understood the truth. It was both, and something else far more terrifying. Marshal Vale finally spoke. "When Earth died," she said softly, "humanity built 12 Exodus Arks. Everyone remembers them as survival vessels." Her eyes remained fixed on the burning planet below. But there was a 13th project. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. The Gravekeeper Protocol. The name alone chilled the room. Suddenly, every surviving human officer moved with renewed urgency. Evacuation orders spread across all channels. Remaining fleets abandoned offensive positions entirely and repositioned around civilian transports instead. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were buying seconds. Lyra felt the realization hit her all at once. "You're not planning to fire the Halo Array." "No," Vale whispered. Outside the observation deck, the vast megastructure began descending toward Celestra, toward the harvesters, toward the center of the apocalypse. Emergency broadcasts erupted across Coalition frequencies as civilians watched the impossible vessel move directly into the enemy formation. Human warships broke apart around it under relentless assault, but the giant structure continued forward through fire and gravitational collapse like an unstoppable artificial moon. The harvesters reacted immediately. For the first time since entering Coalition space, the creatures abandoned civilian targets entirely and turned toward humanity. Mercer's voice cracked slightly as he monitored collapsing stability readings. They remembered this configuration. Lyra looked toward him sharply. "You've used it before?" The old scientist stared at the tactical displays, showing dead worlds long since consumed by darkness. "Once," he said quietly, "and it cost us everything." The megastructure's core ignited. A light brighter than stars erupted beneath the artificial world as hidden reactors overloaded beyond containment thresholds. Entire sections of the vessel tore apart under the strain, while spatial fractures spread outward across nearby space like cracks in glass. The harvesters accelerated toward it instantly. Too late. Marshal Vale opened a system-wide transmission as evacuation convoys fled the collapsing battle zone. Her face appeared across every surviving screen in the galaxy. Not frightened, not triumphant, simply tired. "For generations," she said softly, "humanity believed survival meant outrunning extinction." Explosions thundered somewhere deep behind her as sections of the megastructure collapsed inward. "We were wrong." Coalition civilians watched in silence while the largest vessel ever built by intelligent life descended into the center of the harvester swarm. Survival means leaving something behind worth saving. Lyra felt tears burning unexpectedly behind her eyes. Outside, the human fleet stopped retreating. Every remaining ship turned back toward the enemy, not to escape, to hold them in place. Thousands of human vessels accelerated directly into the harvester formation, while the Exodus Ark's collapsing core reached critical mass. Railguns fired until barrels melted. Defensive grids overloaded. Entire crews rammed crippled ships into advancing biomechanical entities to prevent them from escaping the containment field spreading through space. Humanity fought not like a species trying to live, but like one determined to make death mean something. Mercer looked at Lyra one final time. "You asked earlier why we stayed." His exhausted face softened slightly. "Because somebody has to teach the galaxy how to survive together." Then the Gravekeeper protocol activated. Space folded inward, not exploded. Collapse. A sphere of absolute white silence consumed the battlefield instantly, swallowing harvesters, the megastructure, and thousands of human ships in expanding layers of distorted reality. Stars vanished behind the growing singularity, while gravitational shockwaves rippled across entire sectors. Then, nothing. The harvesters were gone. So was humanity's world ship. Silence spread across coalition channels for several long seconds as billions struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The humans had not saved the galaxy by destroying the enemy. They saved it by sacrificing the last thing they had left: home. Years later, children across rebuilt coalition worlds would learn about humanity differently than the frightened broadcasts once described them. Not as conquerors, not as refugees, but as a species that stood between the galaxy and extinction when every other civilization broke apart in fear. Human agricultural systems restored dead worlds. Human reactor designs powered rebuilt cities. Human philosophies reshaped coalition law itself, replacing isolationist doctrines with mutual defense pacts spanning thousands of systems. And somewhere deep beyond explored space, hidden beneath layers of encrypted silence, a small automated signal finally awakened. A lone surviving human colony vessel drifted quietly through dark space, carrying frozen populations who knew nothing of the sacrifice that had saved the galaxy. Its navigation system slowly adjusted course toward the stars ahead, toward a future humanity would never stop reaching for.